Chapter 19, Amish Adventure. A small calendar with a picture of two frisky horses on it hung on the wall in the Bender kitchen. Each morning, Ian crossed off a day. He wished he could draw a huge circle around the date his dad was supposed to come, but it was impossible to predict. There was no news on the farm about an airline strike or further storms in the Northwest Territories. There was no news either from John. Should Ian make another phone call? Would John answer if he did? Sometimes Jonah bought a local paper in Milltown and Ian read each line. He unearthed from the tiny print the scores of his favorite baseball team. He found lists of records that had made the top 10 and names of movies that he hadn't seen. If he had a radio, he could keep in touch with the world. Maybe he should buy one that didn't need plugging in and stuff it under his pillow. But who could he share it with? The Benders didn't think about the outside world. It took all their effort to take care of the soil, live simply in their community, and practice their religion. Another thing he couldn't share with anyone was his unease about Pete Moss, who was sure to get even with him somehow. But this morning, Ian was at least distracted by the excitement of his job. Reuben had said that he could curry Dick alone. The friendly animal nudged him with his muzzle and buried his head on Ian's neck. Glorious warmth and affection bubbled up inside Ian like uncorked soda water. He rubbed his cheek against Dick's strong, smooth back. In the stall next to his, Gravy Dan and one of the Gingrich brothers were working and talking in low voices. "It's sad for an old man to leave the farm he's lived on all his life," the Gingrich brother said. "Jonah is my lifetime friend," Gravy Dan's voice was burdened. "An old man, a crippled man, and a young boy can't run a farm even with good women like Lydia and Susie. Jonah won't let his family become a burden to all of us." He sighed. If John would come home, he could run the farm with Reuben and the new boy, Ian. The sprightly Gingrich brother laughed. That red-haired boy would make a fine farmer if he could harness his temper. The need for John grew like a rolling ball of snow. But did the Gingrich brother mean what he had just said? That he would make a fine farmer? Ian was elated. He became a little giddy with this surprise compliment. He wanted to sing or dance or just celebrate. He gave Dick a squeeze around the neck that made him neigh, then whispered into the horse's ear, "I'll sit on top of you, Dick, and see what it's like to be a farmer riding his own horse." He climbed quickly up the side of the stall, grabbed Dick's mane, and threw his left leg over the horse's back. Was Dick really so wide and so tall? Ian felt like he was sitting on top of a camel. Dick's ears twitched. He had no training for this kind of behavior. He reared up gently and sent Ian sliding down his back over his tail and into a heap at Gravy Dan's feet. "Well, Ian," the old man was surprised, "there is a time for play and a time for work. The horse knows better than you." Ian didn't answer. He was too embarrassed. He picked up the curry comb and stroked Dick's side with fierce vigor. When his dad came, he could discuss this idea of farming with him. He tried to picture his father in his tweed suit striding through the Bender's barn and over the fields. He could see his craggy face and eager eyes, questioning every inch of the farm. His dad was working in the north with a company that was pioneering into the future. Would he like these people who didn't want electricity, didn't want his kind of progress, and held on to ideas from the past? The morning became warm and sticky with flies. Everyone seemed restless. Even the animals were ill at ease. "Reuben, Ian." Jonah's call shook Ian from his dreaming. "Fill the buckets with oats and feed the pigs." Jonah's voice was cross and tired. The two boys met and raced up the slope of dirt to the second floor of the immense barn. They were excited to find a fresh pile of hay in the storage area. It was an invitation to forget their worries and their work. "I can jump into the haystack farther than you," Reuben challenged. "Let's see." Ian took a run from the far side of the barn. They both landed in the same place and dug themselves out laughing. "Let's tie a rope to the rafters and swing into the hay," Reuben cried, already throwing a heavy rope high into the air over a beam and then tying it tight. Ian grasped the rope in both hands and swung across the barn. It took the breath from his lungs. Then Reuben took his turn on the rope and landed with a high bounce into the haystack. "Reuben! Ian!" A stern voice came from the barn door. The rope swing dangled in the air and the two boys jumped to attention. A strict, scolding Jonah, whom Ian hardly knew, stood in front of them. "You are old enough to know that we don't play during a working day. Now get those buckets, fill them with oats, and come downstairs at once." He means it, Reuben whispered as they hurriedly took down the rope. The boys worked through the morning without saying much, but by noon Jonah greeted them at the kitchen table with his usual good humor. After lunch, there were scores of upturned potatoes to be thrown into baskets. Ian leaned hot and exhausted against a tree. Work can cease to be toil when you begin to enjoy it, Jonah assured him. Ian didn't believe him, but it was enjoyable when the community grain binder came that afternoon with 3 sturdy horses attached to cut down the oats. The tall oat stems fell like hundreds of brown dominoes lined in straight rows. The oats were tied into sheaves, and Ian, with Reuben and 2 other boys, marched through the fields, setting 10 sheaves at a time upright into large bundles called shocks, to dry until threshing time. You should see John set up the shocks, Reuben called to Ian. He does one by himself faster than 2 of us working together. He's almost as fast as Papa. His face clouded. I mean, as fast as Papa used to be. There were guests for evening supper, and Reuben chopped off the heads of 2 roosters so that Rebecca could start to cook. Ian held his hands over his eyes when the headless birds flopped around in the grass behind the barn with blood dripping from their necks. You wouldn't want to eat them with their heads on, would you, Ian? Reuben joked, carrying the headless birds to Rebecca, who doused them in a pail of boiling water to loosen the feathers. One of the guests was Gravy Dan, whose long white beard rippled up and then down over his fat stomach as he breathed. He sat in the rocking chair by the stove, chuckling over the news he was reading in the Sugar Creek Budget, the most popular paper among the Old Order Amish and the Old Order Mennonite people in North America. Once a week it arrived in the Bender mailbox from Sugar Creek, Ohio, brimming with reports from hundreds of communities crisscrossing the border between the United States and Canada. Each line carried news of weather, crops, visitors, new babies, the sick, and the dying. Ach, Gravy Dan exploded, rocking forward till he almost tipped onto his head. Our Ian has his name in the budget. Ian, Reuben, Mary, and Aunt Lydia and Rebecca ran to look. In fine print under Milltown, Ontario, Canada, it read, Ian MacDonald of Chicago is a guest of several weeks at the Jonah Bender farm. He's helping with the harvest while Ezra recovers in the hospital from an accident Ezra had to have his leg amputated. He was hurt when his buggy was hit by an automobile. Ian was pleased. Now everyone would know that he really was working on the farm. He might send the story to Dad and Aunt Clem. Listen to this story from Pennsylvania. Gravy Dan clapped his knees and tipped the rocker dangerously forward. This time he shook with laughter as he read. It is rather early to have frost in the morning hours, but not at the place where the man and wife had an argument while getting out of bed. She said she believes there is frost this morning. The husband doesn't think so and stepped out onto the upstairs porch roof to investigate and slid down over the side. The wife was right. They did have a frost. At supper, as Rebecca carried a steaming bowl of home-canned beef and gravy to the table, the bowl slipped from her hands and fell. The dish broke and the food splattered over the floor. Rebecca burst into tears as Sarah and Mary helped to clean it up. It's just that I miss Papa so. And what will it be like when he comes home and he can't walk?